Dad, where's the money? My voice echoed through the empty hallway of the house where I grew up in Portland. The safe was wide open, completely empty, with no trace of the $10 million I had deposited there just 12 hours earlier. On the kitchen table, I found a handwritten note in handwriting I had known since childhood. Alex, thank you for finally giving me the life I deserve. Don't try to find me. Your father who loves you. My name is Alex, and at 32 years old, I just found out that my own father stole $10 million from me and disappeared in the middle of the night. But while you'd probably expect me to be desperate, screaming, or calling the police, I did something completely different. I laughed. I laughed so hard I had to lean on the kitchen counter to keep from falling over. Because my father, Robert, had no idea what he'd really taken. 3 days earlier, I had sold my software company, TechFlow Solutions, for $20 million. It was the culmination of 8 years of obsessive work, sleepless nights, and every risk anyone could imagine. I grew up in this very house with my widowed father, watching him work 3 jobs to support us after my mother died in a car accident when I was only 15. Robert had always been my hero. He sacrificed his own education, his dreams, his chances at a new life, all to make sure I had opportunities he never had. When I received a full scholarship to MIT, he cried with pride. When I started my company, he was my first investor, even though it was only $500 from his savings. So when I needed to store $10 million in cash overnight, an eccentric demand from the buyer of my dream property, I immediately thought of the safe I had installed in my father's house 3 years ago. It was a military-grade fireproof model with a biometric system. The safest place I knew. That's a lot of money to leave anywhere, son, he had said as the security guards carried the 3 bags into the house. His eyes sparkled in a way I couldn't interpret at the time. Are you sure you need to do this? The buyer insists on seeing the physical cash before the transaction, I explained, programming the safe. It's a matter of 24 hours, Dad. Tomorrow morning I'm going straight to the notary. He nodded, but continued to stare at the bags with a strange intensity. During dinner, he asked questions he had never asked before. Where exactly would I buy the house? How much did it cost? He made mental notes of each answer, something I noticed but dismissed as paternal curiosity. At 10 o'clock, I said goodbye to him at the gate. See you tomorrow, Dad. And thanks for helping me with this. Sure, Alex. It's the least I can do after everything you've done. Now, looking at the empty safe and the goodbye note, I realized there were subtle signs I had completely ignored. The specific questions about my plans. The way he avoided my gaze. The 3 calls he took privately during the evening. But what my father didn't know, and here's why I'm laughing, is that I learned long ago to always have a contingency plan. If you're following this story and want to find out how a betrayed son turned the most painful theft of his life into perfect revenge, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because my father may have thought he was taking my fortune, but what he really did was pull the trigger on the most spectacular downfall you can imagine. And when he finds out the truth about what was in those bags, he'll understand that messing with the wrong person can cost a lot more than $10 million. The question isn't whether he'll pay for what he did. The question is, will he survive the consequences? 3 hours after finding the note, I was sitting at the Portland police station, watching Detective Collins meticulously write down every detail of my statement. At 52 years old, Robert Sullivan had officially become an FBI fugitive wanted for grand theft. Does your father have a criminal record, Mr. Sullivan? Collins asked, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed his notes. None. He's the most honest person I know. The words came out automatically, but they sounded strange even to me. Because the most honest person I knew had just stolen $10 million from me. Any known debts? Addictions? Financial problems? I shook my head, but a strange memory struck me. Over the past 6 months, my father had mentioned some investments several times. When I asked for details, he always changed the subject quickly. Retirement stuff, Alex. You don't need to worry about it. Collins showed me printouts from the airport security cameras. There was my father, at 5:30 in the morning, carrying 3 heavy bags toward the international terminal. He was wearing a cap I had never seen before, sunglasses, and walking with a determined urgency. According to our records, he purchased a ticket to Panama using cash 3 weeks ago, Collins informed me. That suggests significant premeditation. 3 weeks. the same period in which I had publicly announced the sale of my company. The timing was no coincidence. As I drove home that afternoon, my phone rang incessantly. Reporters, curious onlookers, even some friends who seemed more interested in the sordid details than in offering support. I turned off my phone and drove silently through the familiar streets of my childhood. At my father's house, now transformed into a crime scene with yellow tape, I got permission to go in and collect some personal belongings. That's when I discovered more disturbing signs of his planning. In his room, I found a shoebox hidden behind the wardrobe. Inside, newspaper clippings about young tech entrepreneurs, articles on how to transfer money internationally without a trace, and printouts of research on countries without extradition treaties. There was also a notebook with handwritten notes in his familiar handwriting. "Alex always had it easy," read one of the entries, dated 2 months ago. "MIT scholarship, successful company, recognition. Meanwhile, I sacrificed the best years of my life working 3 jobs to give him these opportunities. Now it's my turn to live." Each page revealed more pent-up resentment, more justification for what he was planning. He can make another million with that privileged brain of his. This is just a delayed transfer. Compensation for what I lost. The most painful discovery was on the last page. Alex trusts me completely. That makes it easier and harder at the same time. But in the end, he'll understand. Family means sharing everything, and I've shared my whole life with him. I sat on his bed, holding the notebook, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the words in front of me. Was this the same father who had worked double shifts to buy my first computer? The same man who had cried with pride at my graduation? My phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Alex, it's Dad. I know you're angry, but you have to understand that I sacrificed 40 years of my life for you. Now it's my turn. The money will give me the golden years I deserve. You're young and smart. You can easily rebuild this. I can't rebuild the time I've lost." I replied immediately, "Dad, come home. We can work this out." The answer came quickly, "There's nothing to work out. I'm already too far away, and the money is safe. Live your life, son. I'm finally going to live mine." That was the last I heard from him. In the weeks that followed, the FBI traced bank transactions in Panama. Cash deposits totaling $400,000, exactly the limit for avoiding the attention of the authorities. My father had done his homework meticulously. Investigators discovered that he had rented a luxurious apartment in Panama City 6 months earlier. There were also records of transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't just spending the stolen money, he was systematically laundering it. "His father is more sophisticated than we expected," Collins admitted during our weekly meeting. "He clearly studied very carefully how to make this work." The impact on my life was devastating. The press turned my personal tragedy into a sensational headline: "Tech genius stolen by his own father." Potential investors began to question my judgment. How could someone who couldn't protect $10 million from his own father be trusted with your investments? My fiancée, Jennifer, was supportive at first. But as the weeks passed and the investigation dragged on without results, our relationship deteriorated. "Alex, you need to move on," she said constantly. "Obsessing over this isn't going to bring the money back." But she didn't understand. It wasn't about the money. It was about the complete destruction of my conception of family, trust, and reality. 3 months after the theft, I received an email with a photo of Robert on a tropical beach, smiling broadly, tanned, wearing expensive clothes. The message read, "Thanks for giving me the retirement of my dreams, son." That's when I decided it was time for him to find out the truth about what he had really taken. Because my father, in all his meticulous planning, had made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was the same naive young man I had always been. He didn't realize that years of building a digital security company had taught me to always have contingency plans. What he didn't know was that I learned early in my career that trusting without verifying is a recipe for disaster. And when it comes to $10 million, verification becomes a non-negotiable protocol. Now it was time to teach my father a lesson he would never forget about underestimating the son he raised to be smarter than everyone around him. The question wasn't whether he would pay for what he did. The question was whether he could handle the consequences of messing with the wrong person at the wrong time. 6 months after the theft, my life had become a public hell. The morning show Good Morning Portland invited me on for an interview about recovery after family betrayal, where the host, Karen Walsh, asked me questions that seemed designed to maximize my humiliation. Alex, many people are wondering, how could someone so technologically savvy fail to protect $10 million from his own father? She asked, leaning forward with fake compassion. Trusting family shouldn't be considered a mistake in judgment, I replied, trying to maintain my composure as the cameras captured every micro-expression. But were there signs you missed? Clues that your father was planning this? Each question was a new stab. Even worse were the online comments after the broadcast. Privileged idiot, deserved to lose everything, who keeps $10 million in his dad's house? My professional reputation plummeted. Tech Enterprise magazine canceled a cover story on young entrepreneurs. 3 conferences withdrew my speaking invitations. Investors who had once competed to work with me now avoided my calls. Jennifer finally reached her breaking point during a silent dinner at our apartment. Alex, I can't do this anymore, she said, pushing her plate away. You're obsessed. We haven't talked about anything else in months. My father stole from me and is living like a king at our expense, Jennifer. How can I just forget about that? I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to live. You're destroying what's left of your life over something that already happened. She showed me her left hand. The engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond we had chosen together, was gone. Where's the ring? I sold it yesterday. I need the money for an apartment deposit. Her voice was firm, decisive. I'm moving out, Alex. You can come with me when you decide you want a future instead of living in the past. That night, alone in the apartment that had become a museum of my humiliation, I got a call from Tommy Chun, my best friend since MIT. Man, I saw the interview on TV. What a ridiculous question about missed signs. Everyone thinks the same thing, Tommy. That I was a naive idiot. Well, you were, he said with the brutal honesty that had always characterized our friendship. But that doesn't make what your father did any less terrible. Silence settled between us. Alex, can I ask you something? Did you really not have any contingency plans? Knowing you, who always had backup for everything. Tommy's question hit me like a bolt of lightning. Because he was right. In every aspect of my professional life, I had always been meticulously cautious. Redundant systems, emergency plans, layered security checks. Why do you ask? Because I've known you for 15 years. The Alex who created 3 backup systems for our consulting firm server in college wouldn't store 10 million without some kind of protection. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Tommy's words. There was something nagging at my memory about that day, something trying to emerge through the fog of trauma and humiliation. 2 days later, the final blow came via email from Marcus Blake, CEO of TechVision, the company that had shown interest in hiring me as CTO. Alex, after careful consideration, we've decided to go in a different direction. While we recognize your technical achievements, recent circumstances raise questions about judgment and security that we can't ignore. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the email for the 5th time. My career was officially destroyed. My relationship was over. My family had betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. It was at that moment that something changed inside me. The anger that had been directed inward, turning into self-pity and depression, suddenly crystallized into cold, calculated determination. I opened my laptop and began typing a list. Available resources. Specialized knowledge. Contacts who still trust me. Information about Robert Sullivan that other people don't have. Tommy was right. I always had contingency plans for everything. And as I searched my memory of that fateful day, fragments began to fall back into place. The security company I hired. The special protocol Kyle had mentioned for large sums of money. The additional form I signed without reading completely because I was stressed about the transfer. I grabbed my phone and called Kyle Morrison at Morrison Security Services. Kyle, this is Alex Sullivan. I have a question about protocols for large money transfers. Alex. Man, I'm so sorry about what happened. How can I help? When a person hires security to transport large sums of money, do you have standard protection protocols that the client may not be fully aware of? A long pause on the other end of the line. Alex, are you asking about specific procedures related to your case? I'm asking about standard company procedures. Look, some clients prefer not to know all the details of our security protocols. Especially when they involve, let's say, preventive measures against family risk scenarios. My heart began to race. What kind of preventive measures? Alex, I think we should meet in person to discuss this. We set a date for the following day. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. Not because I had found peace, but because I had found purpose. My father had made the mistake of underestimating the son he had raised to be smarter than anyone around him. He had assumed I was the same naive young man I had always been. But years of building a technology company, negotiating with savvy investors, and navigating corporate politics had taught me valuable lessons about protection and preparation. What my father didn't know, and was about to find out in the most painful way possible, is that trusting without checking may be the virtue of a loving son, but checking without revealing is the wisdom of a seasoned entrepreneur. While he basked in his tan in Panama, spending what he thought was my fortune, I was about to teach him a lesson about what happens when you mess with the wrong person at the wrong time. The question was no longer whether he would pay for what he did. The question was whether he would survive finding out what he had really taken from my home. And when he learned the full truth about those 3 bags, Robert Sullivan would understand that some children learn much more from their fathers than fathers ever imagine. In Kyle Morrison's office, surrounded by security monitors and high-tech equipment, I discovered the truth that would change everything. Alex, when you hired us to transport $10 million, we automatically activated our family protection protocol, Kyle explained, showing me documents I had signed without reading completely. It's standard procedure for large sums when we detect risk factors related to family members. What kind of protocol? Kyle opened a confidential file on his computer. We replaced 80% of the real money with high-quality counterfeit bills, keeping only $2 million in genuine cash to pass superficial checks. The rest remains in our armored vault until the client confirms the security of the transaction. I felt the blood pulse in my temples. You're saying my father has been stealing mostly counterfeit money? Exactly. And every counterfeit bill contains a microscopic tracking chip. We know exactly where that money is being spent. Kyle turned the monitor toward me. On the screen, a world map showed flashing red dots: Panama City, Cartagena, Miami, Las Vegas. Your father has been spending approximately $500,000 a month. If he continues at this rate, the counterfeit money will run out in 16 months. When he tries to deposit large sums or make significant transactions, he will discover the truth. What about the 8 million reais? Safe in our vault, awaiting your instructions. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself completely in planning. I hired Marcus Webb, a private investigator specializing in international asset recovery. Using tracking chips, we meticulously documented every transaction my father made. He's living like a king, Marcus reported during our weekly meeting. $5,000 apartment in Casco Viejo, 5-star restaurant dinners, shopping at designer stores. Yesterday he spent $15,000 on a Rolex. The surveillance footage showed my father transformed. Tanned, wearing expensive clothes, always accompanied by young women who were clearly interested in his apparent wealth. He had told everyone he was a retired American technology investor. The irony is delicious, Marcus continued. He's become exactly the kind of person he always criticized when you were growing up. Remember those lectures about spoiled rich people he used to give? I remembered them perfectly. Robert had always despised ostentation, calling wealthy people spendthrift with no values. Now he was the perfect example of what he had always condemned. While my father squandered fake money, I began to strategically rebuild my life. I used part of the 8 million reais to establish a new digital security consulting firm focused specifically on family asset protection. The irony did not go unnoticed. The company grew rapidly. My personal experience with family betrayal became my greatest credential. Clients in similar situations sought out my services specifically. You understand the pain in a way that other consultants don't, said Patricia Hammond, CEO of a pharmaceutical company that was dealing with embezzlement by her own brother. Your approach isn't just technical, it's emotional. During this period, I received regular updates on my father's activities through Marcus. Each report revealed more about his new personality. He told a group at the bar yesterday that he was finally living the life he deserved after decades of sacrificing everything for his ungrateful son, Marcus reported. He said you always had it easy, and that he just took back what was rightfully his. Those words hurt, but they also strengthened my resolve. 3 months after discovering the truth about the money, I implemented the next phase of my plan. Through Marcus, I made discreet contact with Elena Vasquez, a Panamanian lawyer specializing in international financial crimes. "Senor Sullivan," she said during our encrypted video conference, "based on the documents you sent me, your father committed multiple crimes. Not only theft, but also money laundering by attempting to establish himself here with illegally obtained funds. What are the penalties?" In Panama, financial crimes of this magnitude can result in 5 to 15 years in prison, depending on the defendant's cooperation. I organized each piece of evidence meticulously: bank records, Morrison security documentation, chip tracking reports, surveillance photographs showing my father spending the stolen money. But my strategy went beyond legal justice. Through discreet investigation, I discovered that my father had promised several women in different cities that he would bring them to live in the United States. He had rented expensive apartments and bought extravagant gifts, always paying with cash. He created a network of financial expectations, Marcus observed. When the money runs out or is exposed as fake, these people won't just be disappointed, they'll be furious. Patiently, I established anonymous communication with local authorities in every city my father visited, providing information about his suspicious activities. No direct reports, just tips that would result in closer scrutiny of his transactions. If you're following this story of family betrayal and calculated revenge, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a plan years in the making resulted in the most spectacular downfall you can imagine. 6 months after the theft, I was ready for the final phase. My father had spent approximately $3 million in counterfeit money, with only $2 million genuine dollars remaining from the original bags. More importantly, he had become completely dependent on the luxurious lifestyle that the money provided. I booked a ticket to Panama City. It was time to teach Robert Sullivan that stealing from your own son not only destroys a family, it can destroy the entire life of those who choose that path. The question wasn't whether he would survive what was coming. The question was whether there would be anything left of the person I knew once the truth about those bags finally came to light. Some parents teach their children by example. Mine was about to teach me, through his own downfall, how greed can turn an honorable man into the architect of his own destruction. Panama City greeted me with stifling heat and the smell of salt sea air. Marcus had confirmed that my father would be at Don Jose restaurant at 8 o'clock that evening, celebrating his 6 months of freedom with his current Panamanian girlfriend, Sofia. I arrived at the restaurant at 7:45, choosing a table with a direct view of the entrance. Elena Vasquez, the lawyer, was discreetly positioned at the bar, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers from the Panamanian Financial Police. At 8:03, my father entered the restaurant. The transformation was striking. Robert Sullivan, who for 40 years had worn plain Walmart shirts and worn-out khaki pants, now wore a clearly expensive white linen suit, Italian leather shoes, and a gold watch that gleamed under the restaurant lights. His gray hair was perfectly cut, his beard trimmed with professional precision. Sofia walked beside him, a woman of about 25, wearing a dress that cost more than my father earned in a month working 3 jobs. "Today we celebrate 6 months of my new life, my darling," I heard him say as they sat down 3 tables away from me. 6 months since I finally took what was rightfully mine. I waited until they ordered champagne, Dom Perignon obviously, before getting up and walking over to their table. "Hi, Dad." The champagne glass slipped from Robert's hand, shattering on the marble floor. His face paled instantly, as if he had seen a ghost. "Alex." His voice was a strangled whisper. What are you doing here?" "Can I sit down? We have a lot to talk about." Sofia looked between us, confused. "Roberto, you didn't tell me you had a son." "I have," he muttered, still in shock. "Alex, you shouldn't be here. How did you find me?" I pulled up a chair and sat down calmly. "You weren't as careful as you thought, Dad. Every transaction, every hotel, every expensive restaurant where you spent my money. We tracked it all." "His money?" Sofia leaned forward, interested. "Roberto told me he was a successful retired investor." I looked at my father, watching sweat form on his tanned forehead. "Actually, Sofia, Robert is a fugitive thief. He stole $10 million from me and fled the country." "That's a lie." Robert stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over the table. Alex is making up stories because he can't accept that I finally took what was rightfully mine. Sit down, Dad. Let me tell you an interesting story about counterfeit money. The color drained completely from Robert's face. He sat down heavily, as if his legs had lost their strength. You see, Sophia, I continued calmly, my father thought he was very clever. He planned for months, studied countries with no extradition, created false identities. But he made one fatal mistake. I took out my phone and showed him photos of the bills Kyle had photographed. Do you recognize these bills, Dad? They're the same ones you've been spending for the last 6 months, aren't they? Robert stared at the photos, his breathing becoming irregular. The problem is that 80% of these bills are counterfeit. High-quality fakes, but completely worthless. The security company I hired has a standard protocol for large transfers. Replace most of the real money with traceable bills. You're lying, Robert whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sophia, have you ever wondered why Roberto always insists on paying in cash? Why he never makes bank transfers or uses credit cards for large purchases? Sophia looked at Robert with growing suspicion. Now that you mention it, he always says he prefers cash because it's more discreet. That's because he knows, subconsciously, that there's something wrong with the money. Every time he tries to deposit large sums, the banks ask questions. Every time he tries to make a significant transaction, complications arise. Robert was shaking now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The truth, Dad, is that you spent 6 months living a lie financed by worthless colored paper. The real $8 million never left the security company's vault. Impossible, he muttered. I spent millions. I bought an apartment, cars, jewelry. Small amounts that went unnoticed. But try depositing $100,000 in any international bank. Try buying a property. Try doing anything that requires serious bank verification. Sophia stood up abruptly. Roberto, is this true? Did you lie to me about everything? Sophia, wait, let me explain. You stole from your own son? Her voice was rising, attracting stares from other tables. You made me an accomplice to a criminal? She threw the remaining champagne in Robert's face and stormed out of the restaurant. Now, I said calmly, wiping champagne from the table with my napkin, let's talk about the real consequences of your choices. Robert looked around desperately, like a cornered animal looking for an escape. Alex, I'm your father. I sacrificed everything for you. You can't do this to me. Funny you should mention sacrifice, Dad. Because I've spent the last 6 months sacrificing my reputation, my relationships, my peace of mind, everything to find out where you were and how to make you pay for what you did. I made a discreet signal to Elena at the bar. She nodded and began to approach with the officers. The most ironic part, I continued, is that if you had simply asked for help, I would have given you any amount of money you needed. But you chose to steal, lie, run away, and publicly humiliate me. Alex, please. We can work this out as a family. We don't need to involve the authorities. Family. I laughed bitterly. You destroyed our family the moment you decided I was your enemy instead of your son. Elena arrived at our table, discreetly showing her credentials. Senor Sullivan, I'm Elena Vasquez, financial prosecutor. I need you to come with us to answer some questions about your financial activities here in Panama. Robert looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of despair and something that could have been regret. Alex, I'm your father. No, I interrupted softly. You were my father. The person sitting here now is just someone who destroyed the relationship out of greed and resentment. As the officers escorted Robert out of the restaurant, he turned one last time. You won, Alex. I hope it's worth it. I sat alone at the table, staring at the place where my father had been. I felt no victory or satisfaction. Just a deep sadness at the death of a relationship that should have been sacred. But I also felt something else. Finally, after months of humiliation and pain, I had regained my agency. I had proven that even the most painful betrayal could not destroy me. The waiter approached hesitantly. Senor, would you like to finish your dinner? I looked at the empty chair where my father had been sitting and made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Because this story was far from over. And when Robert discovered the full consequences of his choices, he would understand that some mistakes cost much more than money. Some mistakes cost everything. 6 months after the confrontation in Panama, I received a call from Elena Vasquez with updates on the case. Your father has been sentenced to 8 years in prison for theft, money laundering, and international financial fraud, she informed me. The U.S. authorities have also filed charges against him for tax evasion. When he completes his sentence here, he will be extradited to face an additional 5 years in the United States. 13 years total. Robert Sullivan, the man who taught me about honesty and hard work, would spend more than a decade paying for his greed. What about the rest of the money? We recovered approximately $1.8 million from bank accounts he had opened. The rest was spent on his fake luxury lifestyle. 2 days after the call, I received a letter from La Jolla prison, where my father was being held. I recognized his familiar handwriting immediately, although it seemed more shaky than before. Alex, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I am deeply sorry. Prison has given me time to reflect on what I did. You were right. If I had simply asked for help, you would have given me any amount. My pride destroyed our family. I don't expect you to visit me or respond to this letter. I just wanted you to know that the father who raised you is still here inside, even if he allowed greed to silence him for a while. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Maybe one day I would respond. Maybe not. But keeping the letter wasn't about forgiveness. It was about remembering that people can change, for better or worse, and that trust must be earned through consistent actions, not desperate words. During this period, my family security consulting business flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Clients from across the country sought my specific services for protection against family fraud. Your story resonates with me deeply, said Margaret Klein, a widow whose own brother had tried to steal her inheritance. You understand the pain in a way that other consultants just don't. I implemented revolutionary protocols in the industry, automatic background checks for access to family accounts, tracking systems for large transfers, and psychological training to detect signs of behavioral change in close relatives. The irony did not go unnoticed. My greatest personal tragedy had become my greatest professional advantage. Jennifer returned to my life gradually. First, occasional messages checking in on me. Then coffee dates where we talked about everything except the past. Finally, a quiet evening where we simply watched a movie together, no pressure, no expectations. You're different, she observed as we walked hand in hand along the Portland waterfront. How am I different? More centered. Less naive, but not bitter. Like you finally found peace with the reality that people can let you down without it defining who you are. She was right. My father's betrayal had shattered my romantic view of family loyalty, but it had also revealed something stronger, my own capacity for resilience and growth. 6 months later, Jennifer and I were married in a small, intimate ceremony. We didn't invite Robert, he was still serving his sentence, but his absence didn't bring sadness. It brought clarity about what family really means, people who choose to stand by you not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. Tommy Chun visited my new office a few weeks later, impressed by the transformation he had witnessed. Remember when you called me in despair a year ago, convinced your life was over? How could I forget? Look at you now. Your business is thriving, your relationship is rebuilding, your confidence is restored. It's like watching someone rise from the ashes. Rising from the ashes, I repeated thoughtfully. I like that. The truth was that my father's betrayal, while devastating at first, had forced me to develop skills and perspectives I never would have acquired otherwise. I learned about international law, investigative procedures, psychological manipulation, and financial security at a level that decades of business school could never have provided. More importantly, I learned that trust isn't binary. It's not a matter of trusting completely or not trusting at all. It's about calibrating your level of trust based on evidence, history, and situational context. A year after the confrontation, I organized a small celebration at the same restaurant where Jennifer and I had originally discussed my money plan. This time, our conversation was about expanding my consulting to other countries and possibly writing a book on family financial security. You turned your worst experience into your greatest strength, Jennifer said, raising her champagne glass. That takes courage that most people never develop. Courage, or stupidity. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Courage, she said firmly. definitely courage. During our celebration, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new client inquiry through the company website. Mrs. Patricia Williams from Seattle, whose adult son had been acting suspiciously regarding his late husband's inheritance. I read her message aloud to Jennifer, and we both smiled as we recognized the familiar pattern. Another family being torn apart by greed, another person desperate to protect what they had worked their entire life to build. When do you start? Jennifer asked. Monday morning. Mrs. Williams deserves protection before things get worse. 2 years later, while reviewing successfully resolved cases, I found myself thinking about that day when everything fell apart. My father's decision to steal from me had been intended to destroy my future and secure his. Instead, it gave me a purpose deeper than any tech startup ever could have. During that time, I received a second letter from prison. This time, Robert wrote about how he was using his time to teach financial literacy to other inmates, helping them understand the pitfalls that led to their own downfalls. Maybe, he wrote, I can use the mistakes I made to prevent others from making the same terrible choices. I can't undo what I did to you, Alex, but I can try to ensure that other parents don't destroy their relationships with their children the way I did. This time, I responded. Not to forgive or condemn, but to acknowledge that growth can come from even the darkest places. 3 years after the betrayal, my company had become a national leader in family asset security. We had offices in 12 states and a 6-month waiting list for new clients. Forbes magazine named me one of the most influential 40 under 40 in protective fintech. But the real success came when I got a call from Marcus Webb, the investigator who had helped me track down my father. Alex, you need to see this, he said, sending me a news link. The headline read, Financial Rehabilitation Program in Panamanian Prison Reduces Recidivism by 60%. The photo showed my father leading a class, surrounded by inmates taking notes as he explained basic budgeting and financial planning concepts. He's making a difference, Marcus observed. Who would have thought? Jennifer found me that night looking out the window of our new apartment, gazing at the city lights. Thinking about your dad, she asked gently. Thinking about how strange life is. He taught me honesty through his dishonesty. He taught me about family by destroying ours. He taught me about trust by breaking mine. And now he's teaching others about financial responsibility after losing everything through irresponsibility. Maybe that's his way of redeeming himself. The following week, for the first time in 4 years, I wrote a letter to my father. Not to forgive or reconcile, but to acknowledge that even the most painful betrayals can eventually lead to unexpected growth. Dad, I wrote, your choice to steal from me nearly destroyed me. But it also forced me to become a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person than I would have been otherwise. I can't say I forgive you yet, but I can say I'm grateful for the person I've become through this experience. Keep helping others avoid the mistakes you made. Maybe that's how you can honor the father you used to be. 5 years after the theft, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Robert, calling from prison on his visiting day. Alex, his voice sounded older, more tired, but also more genuine than I remembered. I got your letter. Thank you for writing it. How are you doing? I've learned a lot about myself here. About pride, about resentment, about how a person can convince himself he deserves something that isn't his. He paused. I've also learned that sometimes the consequences of our mistakes can lead to purposes we never imagined. The Financial Literacy Program? I've helped 43 men create financial reintegration plans. 21 of them have been released, and none have reoffended. I can't undo what I did to you, son, but I can try to make sure others don't make the same mistakes. We talked for 20 minutes about the program, about the men he was helping, about the lessons he'd learned about greed and family. When we hung up, I didn't feel complete reconciliation, but something close to understanding. If you've made it this far on this journey of betrayal, resistance, and ultimately transformation, consider subscribing to our channel. We have dozens of other stories where ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges and emerged stronger than they ever thought possible. 6 years later, while reviewing successfully resolved cases, I found myself staring at a photo on my desk. It was Jennifer and me on our wedding day, smiling genuinely for the camera. Next to it was a framed letter, not from prison, but from Sarah Thompson, a client whose family I had helped protect from a fraud scheme similar to the one I had experienced. Thank you for teaching me that trusting intelligently isn't cynicism, it's wisdom, she had written. You showed me that we can protect our resources without closing our hearts. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most profound transformations. And sometimes, a person who tries to tear your world down accidentally hands you the tools to build a world even better than before. As for Robert Sullivan, last I heard, he had become a financial reintegration mentor for ex-convicts, helping them rebuild their lives on a more solid foundation than the one they had lost. Maybe prison had restored some of the father I remembered. Maybe not. But my life no longer depended on his choices. And that perhaps was the greatest revenge of all. Complete independence from someone who once had unlimited power over my happiness. In the end, trust wisely, protect yourself intelligently, but never stop believing that most people are fundamentally good. Just make sure you're prepared for the few unfortunate ones who aren't. Because true victory isn't in destroying those who betray us, it's in building a life so solid and meaningful that their actions can no longer define us. And when you can turn your greatest pain into your greatest strength, you don't just survive betrayal, you transcend it completely.